I don't cry. That sentence used to sit in my chest like a law, not a belief, something stricter than that, a rule I never questioned, because questioning it would mean, what? That I wasn't in control? That I wasn't who I spent years becoming? You have to understand something about men like me. We don't wake up strong, we build it, brick by brick, out of silence, out of disappointment, out of nights where no one came to check if we were okay. I remember one of those nights. It was late. The kind of late where the world feels paused, no cars, no voices, just the low hum of something distant. I was younger then, sitting on the edge of a narrow bed, staring at a cracked ceiling, trying to process something I didn't have words for yet. I felt it rise in my chest, that pressure, that burn behind the eyes, and I killed it, not gently, not with understanding. I shut it down like it was a threat, because somewhere along the way, I decided that feeling too much was dangerous. And you know what's uncomfortable to admit? It worked. It made me sharper, colder, more focused. I stopped reacting, started calculating. People called it discipline, strength, leadership. They didn't see the cost. Here's the part no one tells you. When you train yourself not to feel pain, you don't get to choose what else you lose. It doesn't stop at sadness. It takes everything with it. Joy becomes muted. Connection feels distant. Even victories start to feel mechanical. But I didn't care. Because numbness is efficient, and efficiency wins. Then I met you. And this is where it gets complicated, because you didn't come into my life like chaos. You weren't loud, you didn't demand attention, you were calm, observant, too perceptive for your own good. You looked at me like you could see through something I hadn't even admitted existed, and I didn't like that, at first, because when someone sees you clearly, you lose control of the narrative. And control was everything to me. Do you know what it feels like? To have someone notice the parts of you you've spent years hiding? Not expose them, not judge them. Just notice. That kind of attention is dangerous, because it doesn't attack your armor, it makes you question why you're wearing it in the first place. There was a moment, I never told you this, we were sitting across from each other, not saying much, just existing in the same space, and you asked me something simple. Are you always this composed? I answered without thinking. Of course I am, but inside, something shifted. Because for a second, I didn't feel composed. I felt seen, and that scared me more than any failure ever could. Here's a truth most people won't say out loud. Control isn't always strength. Sometimes it's just fear, dressed up in discipline. Fear of losing, fear of needing, fear of being the one who cares more. I built my entire identity around avoiding that. And you? You stood there without trying to tear it down, and somehow made it feel unstable anyway. Tell me something. Have you ever built a version of yourself so strong that you forgot what it was protecting? Because I did. And the worst part? I started to realize I didn't even know who I was without it. You didn't break me. Not then. But you introduced something far more dangerous than pain. Doubt. Not in you. In me. In the way I lived. In the things I believed made me untouchable. Because for the first time, I started to wonder what would happen if I stopped holding everything together so tightly. And that thought, it didn't feel freeing. It felt like standing at the edge of something I couldn't control, and not knowing if falling would destroy me, or finally make me feel something real. Power doesn't make you fearless. It just teaches you how to hide fear better. That night, I couldn't hide it. It was quiet in a way that felt unnatural, not peaceful, empty, the kind of silence that makes your own breathing sound too loud. I was sitting alone in my room, lights off, just a dim glow from my phone cutting through the dark. Your name was there. Not even a message, just your name. And somehow, that was enough to shake me. I've made decisions that affected entire rooms, entire outcomes. I've handled pressure without blinking, but in that moment, my thumb hovered over the screen and stopped. Not because I didn't know what to say, because I knew exactly what it would mean if I said it. You see, reaching out isn't just a message, it's an admission. And I had built a life where I didn't admit anything. Not weakness, not confusion, definitely not need. But that night, something inside me was asking for you, not logically, not strategically, emotionally, and I didn't know how to deal with that. I told myself to stay still, don't move, don't react, let it pass. That's what I've always done, but this felt different. It wasn't sharp like anger, it wasn't loud like frustration, it was slow, heavy, like something sinking deeper into me the longer I ignored it. My chest tightened, not dramatically, not in a way anyone would notice, just enough to make breathing feel intentional. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't in control. Not fully. And that realization, it didn't scare me in the way you'd expect. It exposed me. Here's the uncomfortable truth. I've always believed that silence was strength, that if you can sit with something and not react, you've mastered it. But that night, silence wasn't control, it was avoidance, and I knew it. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, phone still in my hand, and for a second, I imagined what would happen if I actually called you. Not the outcome, not your response, just the act itself, me choosing to break my own rule, and I felt resistance. Not from you, from me. Because if I called you, I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't act like this didn't matter. I couldn't go back to being the version of myself that never hesitated. That version doesn't pause. And I was pausing. Let me ask you something. What scares you more? Losing someone? Or realizing you need them more than you ever planned to? Because in that moment, I wasn't afraid of rejection. I was afraid of dependency. I've seen what dependency does. It weakens judgment, blinds logic, makes strong people do things they wouldn't respect themselves for later, at least. That's what I told myself. But sitting there, staring at your name, I started questioning if that was true, or just something I used to stay safe. Time passed. I don't even know how much. Minutes. Maybe longer. The room didn't change, the silence didn't break, but something inside me shifted, because I realized this wasn't about you anymore. It was about me facing something I've avoided for years. The need to be heard, not respected, not admired, heard. And that's different, because being heard requires honesty, and honesty isn't always controlled. So I sat there, still, thinking, fighting a decision that shouldn't have been that hard, and the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't a moment of weakness. It was a moment of truth. But truth has a cost, and I wasn't sure I was ready to pay it. I looked at your name one more time. My thumb moved slightly, just enough to almost press it, and then it stopped again, not out of strength, not out of certainty, but because a part of me whispered something I couldn't ignore. If you do this, everything changes. And the question that followed, I still don't have an answer for it, because I don't know what would have been worse, pressing that call button, or living with the fact that I didn't. Missing you wasn't the problem, admitting it was. That's where everything started to unravel. It didn't happen all at once. There was no dramatic moment, no breaking point anyone could point to and say, that's when he lost it. It was quieter than that, subtle, like a crack forming in glass. You don't notice it at first, until the whole thing starts distorting what you see. I was in the middle of my day, surrounded by noise, movement, people expecting things from me, and I delivered, like I always do, focused, sharp, in control. But underneath all of it, there was a thought I couldn't shake. You. It didn't make sense. You weren't there. You hadn't said anything. There was no trigger. And yet, you were there, in the pauses between conversations, in the seconds after a task was done, in the silence I usually owned, and I hated how effortless it was. Because here's the truth I've avoided for years. I don't lose focus, I don't get distracted, and I definitely don't carry people in my mind without permission. But you weren't asking. You were just there. That's when I started to realize something was off. Not with you, with me. I went home that night. Same room, same walls, same controlled environment I built to keep everything in order. But it felt different, not unfamiliar, just heavier. Like the space itself was holding something I didn't want to face. I walked in, dropped my keys, sat down, and for once, I didn't reach for anything to distract myself. No work, no noise, no escape. Just me, and that thought I kept trying to outrun. I miss you. I didn't say it out loud, but it was there, clear, undeniable, and it didn't feel weak. It felt dangerous. Because missing someone isn't just emotion, it's exposure. It means they've reached a place in you that no one else has access to, a place you didn't even realize existed until it's occupied. And I started asking myself questions I wasn't ready for. Why you? Why now? Why does this feel different from everything I've experienced before? And the more I thought about it, the less control I felt. Here's the uncomfortable part. I've always believed I understood people. Patterns, behavior, emotional responses. I could read situations before they unfolded. But this wasn't predictable. This wasn't strategic. This didn't follow any rule I respected. And that bothered me more than the feeling itself, because if I couldn't understand it, I couldn't control it. Let me ask you something. What do you do when something real doesn't fit into the version of reality you've built for yourself? Do you adjust your reality, or do you reject what's real? I tried to reject it. At first, told myself it was temporary. Just a phase. A moment of weakness that would pass if I ignored it long enough. That's how I've handled everything. Suppress. Refocus. Move forward. But this didn't fade. It deepened. And that's when it hit me. Not all strength comes from suppression. Some of it comes from facing what you'd rather not feel, and I wasn't as strong as I thought. Because the truth? I didn't just miss you. I depended on the way you made me feel. And I hate that sentence, even now. It doesn't align with who I am, or at least who I thought I was, because dependency was always something I avoided, something I judged, something I saw as weakness in others. But here I was, sitting in a quiet room, replaying moments, conversations, the way you looked at me like you understood something I hadn't explained, and realizing that connection mattered more than I was willing to admit. That's when the real conflict started, not between me and you, between me and the version of me I've spent years building. Because if I accept this, if I admit that you got through, then everything I believed about control, distance, independence, it all gets questioned. And I don't like questioning things that built me. But I also couldn't ignore what I was feeling anymore. So I sat there, in silence. No distractions, no excuses left, just truth. And I realized something I still don't fully understand. You didn't break me. You didn't force anything. You didn't even try. You just showed up, and somehow reached a part of me I had locked away so well, I forgot it existed. And now I'm left with something I can't undo, because once you see yourself clearly, you can't go back to who you were before. The only question is, what do you do with that version of yourself, once it's been exposed? Because I'm still standing here, not sure if I should embrace it, or bury it again before it changes everything. You didn't chase me, and that's exactly why I couldn't escape you. I've dealt with attention my entire life, people wanting something, proving something, reaching, pushing, trying to earn a place. I know how to handle that. You apply pressure, I create distance. You demand, I withdraw. You chase, I disappear. Simple, controlled, predictable. But you didn't play any of those roles, and that disrupted everything. I remember the first time it really registered. We were walking, late evening, the kind where the sky is fading into something darker, but not quite night yet. Streetlights flickering on one by one, the world slowing down. You weren't trying to impress me. You weren't filling silence with noise. You were just there, calm, like you didn't need anything from me, and I didn't know what to do with that. Because when someone doesn't need you, you can't control the dynamic. There's nothing to negotiate, nothing to leverage, just presence. And presence is dangerous when you're used to staying guarded. I caught myself studying you, not intentionally, just noticing things, the way you listened without interrupting, the way you didn't react to my silence like it was rejection, the way you held eye contact just a second longer than most people can. It wasn't intense, it was steady. And somehow, that felt more powerful than anything loud or dramatic. Here's the part I don't like admitting. I started adjusting around you, not consciously, but subtly, slowing down when I spoke, choosing my words more carefully, even staying in moments longer than I normally would. That's not something I do. I don't adapt. I lead. And that shift? It unsettled me. Because it meant something was influencing me, without force. Let me say something that might sound strange. The strongest person in the room isn't always the one in control. Sometimes it's the one who doesn't need control at all. You never tried to figure me out, at least not in the obvious ways. You didn't ask 100 questions, you didn't push for explanations, but somehow, you understood things I never said. And that made me feel exposed in a way I couldn't explain. There was a moment, I keep going back to it. We were sitting across from each other again, quiet, no distractions. And you looked at me, not intensely, not emotionally, just clearly, and you said, "You don't let people see you, do you?" No accusation, no judgment, just observation. I smiled, gave you a controlled answer, something clean, something safe, but inside, that question didn't land lightly, it stayed. Because I realized something in that moment. You weren't trying to break through my walls. You were simply standing there, unaffected by them, and that made the walls feel unnecessary. Do you understand how uncomfortable that is? To build something your entire life, only to meet someone who makes it feel irrelevant without even trying. I started questioning things I never questioned before. Why do I keep people at a distance? What am I actually protecting? And more importantly, is it still worth protecting? Because here's the truth I've avoided for years. Distance keeps you safe, but it also keeps you alone. And I was starting to feel that. Not as loneliness, but as absence. Absence of something real, something unpredictable, something I couldn't manufacture or control. You brought that into my life without effort, and instead of appreciating it, I resisted it. Because if I accepted it, if I leaned into it, then I'd have to let go of something I've held on to for too long. The version of me that doesn't bend, doesn't need, doesn't risk. And I don't know who I am without that version. That's the part I never told you. Let me ask you something. Have you ever met someone who didn't try to change you, but made you want to change anyway? Not for them, for yourself. That's what you did. And I wasn't ready for it. Because change, real change, isn't comfortable. It forces you to confront things you've avoided. It strips away the excuses. It leaves you standing there with nothing but truth. And truth? Truth doesn't negotiate. So I pulled back, not completely, just enough to feel like I was regaining control. But even then, something didn't sit right. Because distance didn't feel like strength anymore. It felt like retreat. And that's when I realized something I'm still trying to understand. Maybe I wasn't resisting you. Maybe I was resisting the version of myself that existed when I was around you. And I don't know which one is more dangerous. Losing control, or becoming someone I've never been before. Because if I step into that version fully, if I stop holding back, there's no guarantee I'll be able to go back. And that thought, it's still there, unresolved, waiting. Because part of me wants to find out what happens if I let go. And part of me is still holding on for reasons I haven't fully faced yet. Losing you wasn't the part that stayed with me. That's the lie I told myself at first, because it sounded cleaner, easier to carry. People leave. It happens. Simple. Controlled. Finished. But it wasn't finished. It was late again. Different night. Same silence. The room felt colder this time. Not physically, but empty in a way I couldn't ignore. Like something had been removed that I didn't realize I depended on. I was sitting on the floor, back against the wall, lights off, not thinking, not distracting myself, just there. And that's when it hit me. Not the absence of you, the absence of who I was when you were around. That version of me. He's hard to describe, not weaker, not softer, just more open, less calculated. He didn't measure every word before speaking, didn't analyze every reaction, didn't feel the need to stay 10 steps ahead emotionally. And I didn't build that version. He showed up. When you did. That's what unsettles me. Because I don't believe in versions of myself I can't control, and yet, that one felt real, more real than the one I've spent years perfecting. Here's the uncomfortable truth. I didn't just lose you. I lost access to something in myself that I didn't know how to keep without you there. And that's a different kind of loss. I tried to go back to routine, back to focus, back to that sharp, untouchable mindset I know so well. And on the surface, it worked. Everything looked the same. Everything functioned the same. But inside, something didn't fit anymore. Because once you experience yourself without the armor, putting it back on doesn't feel like strength. It feels like hiding. And I hate hiding. That's the contradiction. I built my entire life around control, clarity, dominance. But now I'm questioning whether that was ever real, or just necessary at the time. Do you know what it does to a man when he realizes the version of himself he respected most might not be the version that feels the most alive? I started replaying things, not moments with you, moments within myself. The way I responded differently, the way I stayed present instead of detached, the way silence didn't feel like distance, it felt like connection. And now, silence feels empty again. That's when doubt turned into something heavier, regret, not loud, not dramatic, just persistent. Because maybe I pulled back too soon. Maybe I resisted something I should have explored. Maybe I chose control over something real. But here's the part I can't fully face yet. What if I didn't lose you? What if I walked away from the only version of myself that was actually capable of holding something real? That thought? It doesn't leave. Let me ask you something. Have you ever met a version of yourself that only existed around one person, and then had to figure out if that version was real? or just a reflection of them? Because I don't know the answer, and I don't like not knowing. There's a difference between losing someone and losing who you are with them. One hurts, the other changes you. And I've changed, even if no one can see it. I still move the same, still speak the same, still carry myself like nothing ever touched me. But that's not true anymore. You did. And now I'm left with a question I can't ignore. Can I become that version of myself again, without you? Or was that something that only existed because of you? Because if it was you, then what I lost wasn't just a person, it was a possibility. And I don't know what's harder to accept, that I let you go, or that I might never meet that version of myself again. There's something else I haven't said, something I've been avoiding even in my own thoughts, because if I say it, it changes everything. What if that version of me isn't gone? What if it's still here, waiting for me to choose it, even if it means becoming someone I don't fully recognize yet? I don't have the answer. Not tonight. Maybe not anytime soon. But I can feel it, right there at the edge of who I am now, and who I could become. And the question is, if I step into it, what else will I have to let go of?